when I was starting out, if you told me you could own a camera at this price level with these features in it, it's just like, I wouldn't believe you. Because I think a lot of people just don't, they see like brands like Sony and they're dominant because they just absolutely dominate on their marketing, right? Like, they're not, like we've seen, they're not necessarily better cameras. Say, they don't pay me to be with Panasonic. I'm there because I'm with those cameras as a working filmmaker, using them because those are the cameras I more often than not I'm drawn to. As a professional, I have to shoot on lots of different cameras.
Welcome back to yet another episode of the Lumix Creators Podcast, where we talk to Lumix creators who shoot on Lumix cameras about the Lumix cameras, the whole camera industry, and what is going on. In this episode, we're sitting down with a super talented director, DP, and YouTuber, Ed Processor from London. Now, he creates amazing long-form camera reviews on his own channel, which each scene almost feels like it'd be coming straight out of a movie. But in today's episode, we're going to be specifically diving into the topic about how to get the most out of your Lumix cameras, why they kind of been the underdog in the market, and the competitive edge they bring because of that. So without further ado, for the first time on the show, welcome. What's up, Ed?
Hello. How you doing?
I'm stoked to get you on. I've been watching your content for a while now, and I'm stoked that we get to sit down and have this little bit of a chat talking about Lumix cameras.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
So I guess before we dive into the full topic, I do ask a couple questions to a lot of first-time guests, but I kind of gave the briefest overview of who you are and what you do. Can you tell my audience more specifically, who is Ed? What do you do professionally? What do you do content creation-wise? And just all that good stuff.
Yeah, so I guess I describe myself as like a self-shooting director, DP, filmmaker, and then about 2.5 years ago, got into doing YouTube, so added that to my title as well. But I make mostly sort of factual work, documentary work, short docs, branded stuff. So I'll work for agencies and I'll go in as like a director or a DP. And then I'll also work on stuff where, I'm handling the whole production and, the edit and the grade and stuff like that. So yeah, I shoot mostly factual stuff, kind of with a slight angle of like socially conscious work. So I work with lots of charities and sort of organizations and brands. And yeah, over the years, I have mostly been shooting on Lumix cameras. I enjoy shooting on them very much. And ever since I've started this YouTube channel, I have sort of expressed my love for these cameras even more and sort of shared that with the world.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I feel like so many of the filmmakers and content creators, when you say people ask you that are not in the content creation world what you do, you're like, well, I do this, then I also do this, and I make money from this area too. So I feel like there's a lot of different ways that filmmakers and photographers, title themselves in this industry. But I guess the next follow-up question is, since we talked about that, what brought you to your Lumix? What was that first Lumix camera, and what's the current Lumix camera setup for yourself?
Yeah, okay, so it goes back a bit. So the first ever sort of Panasonic Lumix camera I ever used is called an AF101. I don't know if you've heard of that. So we're going back about 10 years, showing my age here, maybe even 15 years. And this is when I started off. I had no idea what I was doing. I was sort of working in-house somewhere, shooting stuff, and they had this Panasonic camera. It's micro four third sensor and interchangeable lenses. But it was sort of like Panasonic's older video cinema camera before the EVA one. So we had that. And then one day we were on a shoot and one of my colleagues brought along this tiny little camera. And I was like, what's that? And they're like, it's a GH3. And I was this was back in the day where like the Canon 5D was like, the big daddy of cameras. And I saw the size of this little thing and I was like, oh, I didn't really expect much to be coming out of that. And then we got the rushes back from the project and I was just blown away by what this little camera was capable of. It was just beautiful. And, this is, I guess, before the time of like HD, 4K and log profiles and all that sort of stuff. So a few years later, when I started sort of getting into freelancing more and needed my own equipment, I decided to buy GH4, which I absolutely love. So I'm sure you're aware of it, but it's one of the first cameras that sort of brought 4K to the masses in a tiny, tiny form factor, micro four third sensor. And I just fell in love with it. It was like, I don't know, it wasn't super expensive. It had all these video-centric features, beautiful image quality. The lenses were stabilized and tiny. And for someone who was starting out and doing lots of smaller projects and traveling around a lot, it was just ideal for that kind of like work. So then I sort of, went through the motions and eventually started shooting on a GH5. About 5 years ago, I bought a Panasonic EVA 1, sort of my first proper compact cine camera, shot vlog, 10-bit, all that sort of stuff. And then at that point, the GH5 wasn't quite holding up against that camera. So Panasonic, when was it? Was it about 2020 maybe? They launched the Lumix S5, sort of around that period, I think, or maybe end of 2019. So I decided just to buy one of those as my B cam, and I shot a little test project documentary with it, and I was just like, oh my goodness, like, how is this image coming out of this tiny affordable camera? And it was like, not a lot of people were talking about the S5 back then. It was kind of originally pitched as like as a sort of all-purpose content creation camera. And I was like, the highlight roll-off on this camera is incredible. The GH5 was amazing, but it kind of had this tendency to clip quite easily. And I just fell in love with the S5. I was like, the colors coming out of it. And yeah, so I got that. And then last year, got a Lumix S5 2X, which is sort of my main camera that I do all my YouTube stuff on. I use it professionally, either as a B cam or as an A cam, depending on the project. And again, that Lumix S5 2X kind of just solved all of the tiny little issues that the S5 had. I still have my original S5. I still love the image out of it. But yeah, the S5 2X, again, is just like a powerhouse of a camera. I love it.
I know. It's crazy to think that the S5 II and the S5 2X, being the first phase detect autofocus cameras from Lumix, have only been around for 2 years. And it's like, but before that, when that GH4, GH5, like Lumix was dominating the market with, being the first 4K, there's log being introduced, 4K 60, 10-bit colors, and mirrorless cameras. Like, I think about it now, and it's like, we're absolutely spoiled and probably a little bit too much on the features we're able to get in these tiny affordable camera bodies. Sure, $2,000, but like $2,000 back then, with what cameras you were getting back then, maybe you get 4K, maybe that 4K has 10-bit, but it doesn't have log, no, it doesn't have any of these features. It's kind of interesting. Lumix only holds 5% of the camera market share right now. So less than 5%, if that. So they're definitely kind of the underdog players in the whole camera industry as a whole. To yourself, what advantage do you kind of see that for bringing Lumix, having to force them to be more competitive? What advantages do you see Lumix being an underdog currently in the market for consumers and then for the brand as well?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And it's something, again, I think that's always what kind of drew me to Panasonic in a way, because they were this sort of underdog. Maybe they had less to lose, or they didn't have this huge, I don't know, like corporate brand where they had 1 million cameras and they had to protect, the big broadcast cameras and sort of cripple the smaller cameras. I think the advantage is that they can try these new things, and they're quite reactive, and they introduce these like new features quite quickly and sort of become quite disruptive in the industry. So I think the GH4 was quite disruptive in the sense that it brought 4K to the masses for a crazy affordable price at the time. Like, it seems crazy now, but like that feature back then, no one was really shooting 4K as standard. So I think, we saw recently with ARRI Log C, that sort of came out of nowhere. I wasn't expecting that. And I think it just allows them to innovate and take a few more risks where other camera brands are maybe a little bit more cautious and a bit slow to update and stuff. And I think that's what we've seen with Panasonic again, because they have maybe had to be a bit more aggressive with what they do to sort of, reclaim that market share. So they've been taking a few more risks and sort of grabbing for new features and stuff, which us as users and creators are really benefiting from, I think.
And I think, like, I've heard a couple people have mentioned this to me, and like, it's great as a consumer when you buy a camera and the camera company doesn't just launch another camera another 1 to 2 years later that is basically the exact same camera with a couple firmware updates. Lumix continuously giving us more and more firmware updates, like the proxy and frame.io integration, the upgraded image stabilization, the upgraded autofocus features. Other camera companies like Sony, for example, would make that into an entire new body, sell it for another $2,000, and focus more on about making more money for the company and less on focusing on giving the most featured packed camera. So it might take Lumix, 5, now going on to hopefully 6 years to release a camera for the update versions. However, they released that camera back then and it's been able to hold up to now. And, this next camera, whenever it comes out, whatever the flagship full frame camera would be, is going to hold up for years to come until it finally feels like, okay, we can't really firmware update this camera anymore. We now need physical hardware to improve it even more. What is your kind of thoughts about that? Lumix giving firmware updates, adding new features into cameras. What are kind of your opinions and thoughts on that topic?
Yeah, I mean, I think it sort of gives you a lot of confidence when you buy a camera like that it's going to get a sort of extended support, and that the camera that you buy on day one isn't necessarily going to be the same camera you get a year or two later, that it's going to continue to sort of innovate and give you more features to make it even more useful down the road. And again, that's something I've always loved. It's like when I'm not necessarily sort of like someone who is with Panasonic for Panasonic's sake. They don't pay me to be with Panasonic. I'm there because I'm with those cameras as a working filmmaker, using them because those are the cameras I more often than not I'm drawn to. As a professional, I have to shoot on lots of different cameras, and the Lumix ones, more often than not, are the ones I choose to own for myself and shoot on. And like you say, with Sony, we saw recently that 3 years after the FX3 came out, however many years, they were adding shutter angle. And for me, if I was paying, I don't know, £4,000 in the UK, which is a lot of money, I would expect that in a cinema camera, a cinema branded camera as standard. And the fact, I think they rolled it out and then after a day had to pull it back because it was sort of, the update was messing up cameras and stuff. So I think as filmmakers and consumers, our money and time is precious, and we can vote with our wallets and choose which camera brand to go for. And if a brand has a track record of supporting cameras and providing useful features, not just gimmicky features like charging you to add frame lines to your camera or something like that, things that are going to give you the ability to sort of impress clients or make more money or streamline your workflow, that's incredibly useful.
And especially because it's they're adding features which could feel like paid upgrades, like camera to cloud, proxies, things like that feel like you should be paying for these features, because these are high-end features. The fact that you don't really need an Atomos monitor anymore with certain Lumix cameras that shoots ProRes RAW. You're able to shoot proxies, send it to the cloud. You don't need to spend $500 somewhere else. They tend to give you a lot of these features in camera. So kind of list some of those. What are some of your favorite features that Lumix cameras have, specifically over other brands?
Definitely IBIS, So the IBIS for me is someone who likes to shoot handheld. I like to move around a lot. I like to be quite sort of active in the way I shoot. I don't tend to be tethered to tripods too often, maybe just interviews. So the IBIS is just next level on the Lumix cameras. And I remember, I've gone up through different cameras and I shot a lot on the Sony A7S Mark II, which was one of the first cameras to sort of introduce the IBIS system. And it was quite game-changing at the time to be able to sort of shoot on vintage lenses without stabilization. And, with the Lumix S5 and the S5 Mark II, they've really cracked that in the sense that they're probably the industry leading experts on providing that feature in cameras. For me, image quality, Vlog, I know it's sort of, it's log profiles are across all cameras, but for me, the Vlog profile is just my favorite. And again, that's what's kept me with Lumix cameras. I just love color grading it. It's so I don't know how to describe it. I've heard someone describe it as thick and creamy before. You can push it around and pull lots of colors out of it. And I also shoot on a red camera, and it mixes in very nicely with that. So when I'm grading the two cameras, when I grade other brands like Canon or Sony in the past, it's a lot harder just to push stuff around. I sort of see it as molding clay, whereas the Lumix cameras are just I don't know, they're beautiful. I love them. In terms of other features, what else have we got? We've got open gate. So, okay, yeah, this is a big one. Anamorphic shooting.
Yeah.
So, you know, maybe like 2 or 3 years ago, this might not have seemed like a big deal, but there's been like a mini revolution with affordable anamorphics over the last few years. And again, in a camera of this size, at this price, even the Lumix S9 as well, it's just incredible. I've been shooting on lots of anamorphics over the last 2 years, and, you know, they've given you like features and then some. So not only do you get like open gates and different, you know, you can even shoot crop sensor in a 4:3 aspect ratio, but they give you anamorphic IBIS as well. That isn't a gimmick. It works and it looks beautiful. So that's like all these like extra features that are jammed into like a tiny camera, and then the fact that you can shoot like B-RAW, and then on GH7 you've got internal ProRes RAW, internal ProRes on the S5 IIX. You know, like, these aren't just like little features or gimmicks. These are little powerhouses of a camera. And like, when I was starting out, if you told me you could own a camera at this price level with these features in it, it's just like, I wouldn't believe you. And all of these things just help unlock, they help you achieve more, they help you do more with less in your professional projects. So like, if I'm delivering for broadcast or for an agency, I can deliver in 10-bit all intra or in ProRes with a small camera. Or I can fly it on a gimbal as my B cam and still capture amazing high quality footage without having, you know, to strap on an additional recorder or something like that. I'm sure there's many others that I'm not thinking of. What else am I not thinking of?
There's frame markers, shutter angle.
Shutter angle,
there's
yeah.
Waveforms. It'd be great if they put false color.
Yes, I'm sure they will, you know, knowing Panasonic. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I just take these all for granted now. Like, I think if I went onto another camera and saw that they weren't there, I'd be like shocked. But I'm so used to having them that I just feel like they're normal features. So when I hear the Sony camera hasn't got shutter angle, I'm like, what?
Even with like the whole S9 and GH7, the camera to phone integration, being able to record videos or take photos in real time, and it's already on your phone. It's already like the photos are already on your phone for social media, or the videos are on your phone for people who edit on their phone now. Like, even that type of innovation is pretty impressive. Like, that they're starting to think in the future, like, okay, the content creators now edit on their laptops. The content creators coming, all the, you know, Gen Zs and Gen Alpha kids that are starting are editing on their phones, and they prefer to edit on their phones. So besides just continually using iPhone footage, they want to upgrade their quality. The S9 has been like kind of filling that hole for these, you know, younger kids. Obviously, they don't have the money probably right now because they're high school job flipping burgers, but it's pretty interesting. Now, you kind of mentioned B-RAW, ProRes RAW, all intra. Personally speaking, which one of those like 3 are your like favorite to shoot in?
That's a tricky question, because if I could choose, I would shoot B-RAW, because I love working with that. Like, one of my, like, maybe this is something we'll talk about a bit later, but one of my big wishes is that these cameras could shoot B-RAW internally. I don't think we'll get that because of the way they're going with ProRes RAW. Yeah, but for all my YouTube content and even lots of professional stuff, I find like the 10-bit internal codecs are good enough. They're, you know, more than good for most projects for web delivery. I really like shooting on ProRes with like an external SSD. I like shooting B-RAW a lot. I think the B-RAW, especially from the new Mark IIs, just looks phenomenal compared to sort of previous iterations. I don't know what they did to it, but I think they sort of reworked it and reformulated what was going on there. But I find the setup, I don't personally love working on like the projects where I'd want to shoot RAW, maybe a slightly higher spec project. I don't always love recording to an external monitor. And me personally, my video assist monitor has gotten a bit broken and battered over the years, so it's not working as well as it should. But I work in Resolve now, so ProRes RAW isn't as useful to me as it was when I was probably working in Final Cut. I actually shoot mostly for my YouTube internally, and not even in all intra, like on long
Just long up.
Yeah, it works fine.
Yeah.
There's loads of flexibility to grade. I've never really pushed up against any sort of issues or boundaries in terms of the image falling apart. And again, I think that's a testament to the log profile and how much you can push it around and play around with it. And I love color grading. I love just sitting down and playing with the image and seeing where it can go. And coming up with new grades or using other people's power grades and stuff. And I think Vlog's always given me the perfect sort of sandpit in order to work with images. Yeah.
Yeah, I when you were shooting B-raw, were you shooting in the B-raw color profile, or would you switch it to a Vlog color profile?
Oh, God, that's a good question. I can't remember. I haven't shot B-raw for a while. I think the last project I did, I think in post I changed it to the Blackmagic one to play around with it, but I have used the V-Gamut profile in the past. I love shooting B-roll, but I only do it maybe like a couple of times a year, like 4 or 5 times a year. But again, I don't have a lot of experience with the Blackmagic cameras, but so I wanted to have a little go playing around with what it looked like. I mean, the fact that you can put it into another color space is pretty cool, and the fact that, you know, with other brands, I feel like it's so locked down, but with like the L Mount Alliance and the sort of B-roll compatibility, I feel like the ecosystem is a bit larger, and it sort of dovetails and plays nicely with sort of, you know, stuff happening with other brands, which I find again is really interesting. It's not open source, obviously, but it's like it feels a little bit more like that mentality when you're working with these cameras, and that's something I'm always drawn to in technology, that sort of openness and sort of ability to sort of collaborate with, you know, where brands collaborate to make something and work together. So like the L Mount Alliance is really interesting because you're not just necessarily locked into one set of Lumix branded lenses. You know, people are going to be making lenses for multiple camera systems that have that mount, and it feels quite nice that there's a little club between these different camera brands using that same mirrorless mount. Because I also shoot on a Komodo and it has an RF mount, and those lenses are just like exorbitantly expensive. Whereas there's some really nice L mount options out there at the moment.
I feel like for myself, I would love to see that, since I am still a Final Cut editor, I would love to see like a ProRes LT, just a light version where I still get that raw flexibility, but then it's not a gigabyte a second, because that starts filling up real fast. So now this is kind of like oh no, go for it.
No. Well, that's why I was just like, it was a little bit of a. It's not a shame. It's amazing they squeezed it into the camera, but it feels kind of weird that we have ProRes RAW. I used to work in Final Cut 10, but I moved to Davinci because I sort of moved on from the color grading tools in Final Cut, and I feel like if you're shooting RAW, you're shooting RAW because you want that flexibility in the color grading. So maybe, you know, what I think would be incredible is if one day Davinci Resolve opens up compatibility for ProRes RAW, because that would really change the way that I work as well, because if that happened, then I would definitely, you know, consider shooting ProRes RAW. If future Lumix cameras might have that feature, then that would be awesome, to have like an internal RAW workflow and still be able to work in Davinci Resolve.
So I guess this part of the conversation is a little bit more speculation about, you know, what's next for Lumix. With the whole L Mount Alliance, you know, with the partners, you know, DJI, Blackmagic, Lumix, Leica, Sigma, and there's a couple more like Samyang. What are kind of your hopes for the Lumix and the L Mount Alliance in the future? I know everyone's been like, yes, let's get B-raw on these cameras internally, no more monitor. It's very unlikely, but you know, we can shout from the top of our rooftops and hope. But what are some of your speculations about like what you could hopefully see in the future?
I mean, there's the speculation of what I want and what I think will happen. What I would love, and I think what a lot of people would love, is a compact. I'd love a Lumix branded compact cinecam of some type. So as I mentioned previously, I still own the Panasonic EVA 1. Absolutely love that camera. And shot on it for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. And I would have loved to have moved up and replaced that with another Panasonic cinema camera, but there wasn't one at the time. So I would love something in the form of that in the future. I don't know if we will ever see that, but that would be incredible. That would
like
be
a box camera?
A box camera, not the sort of BS1H type thing. I tried that out. It didn't quite work for me, but something that's a little bit more fleshed out, that's designed. I wouldn't mind a box camera, but is definitely designed for the purpose of being, you know, rigged as a production camera, whereas the BS1H feels a bit more like a sort of studio live streaming style camera.
What if it was like the BS1H, but you had a side handle and there's like a flip out screen?
Yeah, that would be like, you know, if it was sort of a similar form factor to something like the Canon C70 or something like that, that would be fantastic. Flip out screen, you know, great internal features. Obviously, everyone will say there's internal NDs. Stabilized sensor would be really cool. Something really cool happening with like high frame rates. I'm not someone who definitely shoots a lot of high frame rates, but something with an uncropped high frame rate mode would be incredible.
Yeah, at least 4K 120.
Exactly. That would be enough for me. Log profiles, some sort of internal RAW profile. I don't know what they would do with the battery solution. Maybe they'd use the old EVA batteries or a V-mount solution. I can't really see them using that. But yeah, something that is like the hybrids that they make are fantastic and brilliant. But one of the things that gets in my way a bit when I am shooting video on like the Lumix S5 IIX on professional jobs is they are video centric features, but they're not ergonomically necessarily the best form factor to be shooting on for. And you can rig them all up and house them in cine housings and stuff. But something, that was a little bit more cine cam focused from Lumix would be a dream come true. But I love their compact cameras. Like I love the S9. I think there was a lot of sort of
the S9 is
hoo-ha
so
about
sick.
that, and I'm always hovering over like the buy button when I see them, and as when they're going cheaper or they're on sale, and I might still pick one up because for me, as a content creator, the S9 is a fantastic camera, like for video capture, because it sounds silly, but the Lumix S5 IIX, it's not a big camera, but it's not a tiny camera, and if I'm traveling or going on holiday, especially if it's like on holiday, there's something about like the psychology of bringing like a work camera with you, and something like the Lumix S9 is a nice little tiny body where you can bring one lens and sort of put it in a bag and forget about it, whereas Lumix, it feels like I'm bringing my work with me if I'm going on a trip with the S5 IIX. But yeah, in terms of future, like I would love to see what's going to happen with their new flagship cameras. I'm not bothered about 8K resolution. It's not something I really want. Decent 6K. I would love improved sensor readout speeds, better rolling shutter performance. I think that's the only major criticism I have of the S5 IIX. So I actually currently shoot a lot of anamorphic and other content in Super 35 mode sometimes if there's going to be a lot of movement with my S5 IIX. So if whatever cinema camera or flagship camera, they address that would be incredible as well. And bring all the other great quality of life things that they brought over the years. So ARRI log C would be cool. Autofocus would be cool. Like a good, decent, clean dual ISO even. What we see, the new Canon has like a free ISO gain.
Tri ISO or triple triple native ISO. There you go. Triple native ISO.
Something like that is always good. And then just like good robust settings for dialing down internal sharpening and noise reduction and stuff. Again, that's the only other minor criticism I have of the S5 IIX, because it's not necessarily designed to be a cinema camera. The image can be a bit sharp or digital looking sometimes, which is fairly easy to fix in post. But I think other cameras like the S1H, they have an optical low pass filter, so that's something I'd like to see in future releases to just give you that slightly nicer, creamy organic image out of those cameras.
I know. I'm always pinned diffusion on all of my lenses just to make it a little bit less sharp. I feel like if they made basically the GH7 in a more of a box style cinema camera, full frame, internal NDs, and then maybe throw in open gate 60 or 50 frames a second for UUKs, with even a 10-minute record limit, that would be so nice for filming social media, like slow motion things that can be cropped vertically or horizontally. So before we kind of dive, I guess, into this last question, where can people check out your channel? Where do you want to send people and all that good stuff?
Yeah, so definitely check out my YouTube channel. I think it's just Ed Prosser, whatever, youtube.com/Ed Prosser. I'm also pretty active on Instagram. I think I'm Prosser Ed on Instagram. And then also you can find me on Threads as well. So between those three platforms, I'm always pumping out bits and bobs from behind the scenes on Instagram and Threads, and then posting a lot of my work on YouTube, which I love. Like, I never expected to get into YouTube. I never planned. It was a Lumix camera that actually got me into YouTube. It was the BS1H. I just was interested in trying it, and they sent me it to test. And I was like, oh, I should make a YouTube video about this. And then 2.5 years later, here we are.
I know. YouTube's such a fun journey. What do you think Lumix kind of needs to do right now to get a bigger slice of the camera market in terms of percentages? You know, everyone wants that cinema camera, but I don't know if necessarily the cinema camera is the camera they need to get a bigger market share.
Yeah, I mean, this is the $1 million question. I think continue on the track that they're on in terms of really, I think the next flagship, if there's the next, line of flagship cameras, I think they've done it. I think they've been really sensible with what they've done with the S5 and S5 Mark II. I didn't quite understand why that was their next camera until I sort of thought about it. And I think, releasing a really killer sort of camera that is affordable and that pitch that content creators and professional filmmakers that sort of covers all the bases and sort of capturing that market and then waiting a few years to release some sort of like really killer, big cameras so those people can then upgrade and have a path to upgrade to those is really sensible. And I think one of the other things that Lumix could potentially do is, which I think they are beginning to do, is maybe just in terms of like marketing and getting the word out there and, influencer marketing. And you look at what some of the other brands are doing in terms of like big events and really sort of like pushing cameras out to as many people as possible. I think Lumix is sort of on the road to doing that, but I feel like maybe it could do a little bit more in terms of getting that visibility online, getting sort of thought leaders and influencers to sort of use these cameras and demonstrate how awesome they are. Because when I see this happening at the moment, I see lots of cool influencers and creators, and they've never used Panasonic cameras, and then they're handed a S5 IIX, and suddenly these people become Panasonic shooters overnight. So I think the power of that is really powerful, and I think if they sort of push some more resources into doing that to get the word out and to try and like encourage, because I think a lot of people just they see like brands like Sony and they're dominant because they just absolutely dominate on their marketing, right? Like they're not, like we've seen, they're not necessarily better cameras, but I think it's the sort of like brand familiarity, the associations with certain creators that really sort of helps market that brand. So I think, in the next few years, stepping that up as they are at the moment and sort of really getting cameras into people's hands and getting that visibility online will really help with that, I think.
Yeah, I think having that like full ecosystem of the intermediate, the more professional consumer cameras, and then the cinema cameras eventually, having that type of ecosystem is really good. I also think flip side, getting more entry-level cameras that still have phase detect, but maybe it doesn't have all the bells and whistles like the other cameras do, but calling it around $800 to $1,000 is also an area of like improvement to like have, like, for example, like an S5 II for $800, but it's an APS-C sensor L mount would be,
I would love like a tiny,
it'd be so nice,
Super 35, like Sony's got the FX30, and I love, I don't have any issue shooting on Super 35 cameras, and I think even when you crop in on the S5 IIX, it looks fantastic. So I think that is something that's kind of missing at the moment. You've got the micro four thirds and then you jump to full frame, and there isn't really this sort of like really nice, affordable, like you say, $800, £800 sort of disruptive little camera that maybe has IBIS and autofocus, but there's an APS-C sensor. And I think, like you say, widening their offering, so they're hitting all those different levels in the market, because it is incredibly segmented now. If you look at the Sony line or Canon line, there's lots of cameras that hit all these different levels of the market. And I think we'll see it in time, I think, with Panasonic. We're getting the right signals. And every release, they don't feel like duds to me. They feel like they're bringing new features, and sort of adding something into their lineup. So I'm really excited to see what happens with Panasonic in the next year, personally.
Yeah, because I feel like all the current cameras that they release, they like throw in everything they possibly can in these cameras and not holding back.
Yeah.
And it becomes a really featured rich camera, but like, for a 16-year-old, $1,500 to them is basically, their car at that point in their life.
Around the S9, it's an incredible camera, but they could easily have stripped back some stuff and, maybe made it $800, like you say, with a crop sensor. And $800 there's a lot more attainable, I think.
Yeah, and I feel like it's that, but it's like their Micro Four Third cameras are great, and they have a lot of good entry level Micro Four Third cameras. But the issue there is like, if you get into the Micro Four Third ecosystem and you have a bunch of native lenses, you can't transition any of that into full frame. Even if you had L mount lenses, L mount cannot be adapted on Micro Four Third, unfortunately, which is like a huge like kind of sort of I don't know, it's just a big like pain sore that Lumix has.
One of the things that I sort of mulled over in the review of the GH7 is that it's so strange that they have these two closed off ecosystems that don't really integrate with each other, which is a real shame, because the GH7 is a fantastic camera, and if you could have both, and yes, you can adapt PL and EF lenses, but you want to, with the amazing autofocus, you want to make use of that. So that for me is the only sort of sad thing about them creating these killer cameras, and the fact that Micro Four Thirds is still sort of thriving. Even if they made a body of the GH7, same Micro Four Third sensor, but they just took out the Micro Four Third mount and put an L mount instead and made it maybe a slightly bigger body if needed, that would even be, I feel like, better, because then it's like you're getting all the specs of the GH7 but with an L mount, and then you can adapt that into the future cameras. Yeah, that's a really cool idea. I never really thought about that. And I think when I used the GH7 this summer, I was just, I used to shoot on these cameras that transitioned over to the S5. I was reminded of how much I love them. And I don't know what it is about the GH7. It felt so good in my hands, in a way that
So good.
I don't know. They've done such a good job with the grip, and it's a bigger camera than I thought it would be when they first sent it to me to test. I was like, oh, I didn't realize it'd be this big. But then when I went out shooting with it, I was like, oh, it's really comfy this is not something I really think about a lot. It's really comfy to shoot with. So they did a great job with that. But like you say, that would be awesome.
Yeah, that's an awesome camera. The flip up screen, the front record button, tally lights. That's like the best Micro Four Third camera out there, hands down. But anyways, I thank you so much for joining me in this conversation, Ed. If you viewers want to check out an episode where I talk to another Lumix creator talking about, what Lumix is doing in the current industry, you can check out that video right there. And then YouTube recommends you might like this video right here. Till next one, guys. Peace.